You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn & Company. I'm your host, Kyle MacNaught. Thanks for checking us out. Often when we talk about data security, we address it from the IT perspective of what can you kind of do to stay safe. But it's just as important to understand where you are legally liable when it comes to data security. So, in this episode, I'm going to have Ray Biederman join the show to talk about the legal perspective of data security. In this conversation, we're going to focus on two important elements: eDiscovery and information governance. So, without further ado, I'm going to let Ray join. I'm going to have Ray join the show. Ray, how's it going?
Great. Thank you very much for having me on, Kyle.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to talk because, like I said, most of the time when we talk data security, it really is from an IT perspective, but I never even thought of the legal kind of ramifications of stuff because it's more like, crap, I got to go reset my passwords. I got to do all this. But
Yep.
I'm so excited to kind of hear the legal side of all this. But before we even get into that, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. You got kind of an interesting journey. Tell them about yourself and Discovery Mastery.
Sure, absolutely. So I started at Butler University in undergrad as a music major. I got my degree in music education, and during undergrad, I had to figure out how the heck to pay for school. And so I got a job at an AmLaw 100 firm, which AmLaw 100 is kind of the 100 biggest law firms in the country. And so I worked in their brand new eDiscovery department. And so eDiscovery was just starting to be a thing at that time. And just a little primer on eDiscovery. It's basically anything electronic that any data you create that's electronic, it has some sort of implication in any piece of litigation you're in. And so at this time, it was mostly just email. Email was pretty new, and some companies were just starting to use it for all of their processes. And so I was in charge of getting that email and reviewing it and then figuring out what was relevant to a case and getting that out the door.
So what year was this? Sorry, not to date you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It was, I started in January 2004.
Oh, wow. So eDiscovery really is somewhat of a kind of newer thing in terms of the business sense.
Yeah, the first rules surrounding eDiscovery in the court system were applied in December of 2006. So this was very early on. And as the technology increased, I really enjoyed working in that space. I ended up going to law school and becoming an attorney at that firm for several years before leaving and starting my own law firm and my own wholly owned eDiscovery company. And that happened about 5 years ago. During the course of that, we decided that there was a gap in the software space, in the software stack for this particular application of eDiscovery. And so we developed a piece of software called Discovery Master, which helps companies understand their eDiscovery spend, understand and forecast out when they'll be able to be complete in the discovery process. And so we actually just had that for our internal clients, and so many people liked it, we decided to launch it as its own product.
Oh, wow. So that's kind of cool. So it's essentially you are a lawyer. You're kind of working mainly kind of with companies, right? Or from my understanding. And then you kind of just create this little platform for yourself because of the time and stuff. And I know it's something we'll kind of get into with what eDiscovery and how much of the burden it really is for companies. But so that's how Discovery Mastery kind of fit in, was just sort of like, hey, we have this really good document and this really good little kind of platform and application we're using. Other people might enjoy this.
So basically selling these eDiscovery services, there are a lot of vendors that do it now. So it's a lot like selling sand. And so you need something to say, my sand's better than your sand. And so that's what this piece of software was. And so many people liked it that we decided, maybe we'll just make it its own company and just sell it out to everybody.
Oh, that's awesome. So let's start. Let's describe what sand is, right? Because to be honest, I mean, it's for something that, it's been here short while, but 2006 still enough time, and how much information we kind of are required to know in our jobs down now. I really didn't know about eDiscovery, so you sort of explained it a little bit, but in the layman's terms, what is it? Is it really any like electronic kind of communication I have? Like what does it mean for someone kind of working in the day to day of a company? Is it
Sure.
affect them?
Yeah. So, so every there's this statistic that's around that every 2 years we create as much data as we created from the beginning of time until that beginning of that 2 year period. So there's just an explosion of data, and a lot of this data is corporate data. So you think of email, you think of text messages, you think of phone calls, even asking your smartphone to play something or asking one of your smart devices what time it is. There's data that's collected on all of this. And in the context of litigation, there's this concept called discovery. And basically, you send a request to the other side and you say, I want all information related to X or information related to Y. And you have to search through all of your data sources to find information that might be relevant. And as technology increases and the different pieces of software we use increase, we are creating just tons and tons of data that may be relevant.
Wow. So, okay, my mind is like turning right now, and I know I sent you scripts, but
Yeah.
talk. How does it work? I guess as we we move to this more work from home thing, we'll kind of go back into the transportation element of this.
Mm-hmm.
But how does it work with personal devices? How does it work with, especially if you're kind of like texting on your own personal phone to a colleague or a coworker, or I mean, hey, a lot of us all of a sudden found, hey, you're working from home, you can't come to the office, you have to
Yeah.
use your own technology. How does that work out? How does this all? And then never mind the whole data privacy right now. That's kind of the top of everyone's. Sorry,
Yeah.
I got a lot of questions. So let's start with that first thing. How do personal devices kind of play into this thing, into eDiscovery?
So for better or worse, they are in play. There have been several cases. In fact, there was a case in the Southern District of Illinois just a few years ago where someone posed that exact question. Well, all of our sales reps are using their personal devices, so we're not going to search them. And the judge said, he fined the company $1 million, and then second, he said, any person who thinks their personal device isn't subject to this litigation, I want them to come to this court and explain to me why. And so personal devices are within play. And typically at the beginning of a litigation, what you're supposed to do is put together what's called a litigation hold letter. And this is basically a memorandum that goes to every employee that may have information that's relevant to a case. And it says, you can't delete anything. We're going to need to get an image of your personal device. And we're going to, keep all of this information in some sort of information platform. And so, it's very common, and most people don't think about it until they get sued. And frankly, email has gotten a lot better. When email first started, people were very candid in their emails, like saying just things they should not say. And then as text messages started moving into more prevalence, people started to get a little more business-like in email, but then the texts were there were some flamethrowers in there. And so then we started collecting that stuff, and that makes people squirm pretty easily. And now, that's moving into Slack messages, instant messages in companies, Teams chats. Yeah.
That's what about the data privacy element of everything? Like, hey, I'm a marketer, right? So
Uh-huh.
GDPR, all those California privacy rights. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like the big battle for privacy kind of comes in. Like, I don't want marketers coming to me, but how does privacy work into the legal sense of things? Like, are you not entitled to any privacy? Like, in terms of the e-discovery?
So if it's responsive and relevant to the litigation, that sort of has predominance over all of it. And even in a lot of those laws, you have to preserve data in a certain way. You have to keep it in certain silos, like GDPR, right? So you can collect data, but depending on the application, you have to keep that data in that European country, and you have to review it in that country, and you can't export anything that's not relevant out of that country. And then they've got processes and procedures in place for relevant data. But that initial collection, that scope of preserving everything is overarching on top of all of this.
Wow. Wow. That's chaos. That's crazy. And like I can see why, like you say, like companies need like you're gonna need someone to help you with eDiscovery. I mean, the sheer amount of data, like you say, every 2 years it's building up. This is fascinating. How much are people aware of this? Like in your experience, I mean, I'm sure you're dealing with people kind of at the time where they are becoming aware, but is this, and I know we're going to talk a little bit later about information governance and stuff like that, but right now, I mean, what, in your estimation, are companies, are individuals kind of aware of this stuff?
So most companies that haven't been in litigation don't really think through this very much. And then as soon as they get into litigation and then they get the bill for eDiscovery services, then they start thinking about information governance. And so that's usually our best sales pitch for selling information governance services. We'd like it to be the opposite, where people think about their information governance needs at the beginning, and then we can cull down the available data to a reasonable amount. And that really is the best way to reduce costs on eDiscovery and litigation.
Yeah, I mean, being proactive instead of reactive always is going to be the best way.
Yep.
So again, our audience mainly is kind of the shippers, right? We're kind of the people
Mhm.
like in the day to day. What of the transportation documents kind of falls under eDiscovery? Is it stuff like the bill of lading, invoices, like volume trackers? Like, is it anything that you kind of are using could be a part of eDiscovery? Because I know like they already kind of struggle with the data for that, but
Yeah,
is that stuff kind of anything electronically being sent could fall under it?
absolutely. So it obviously depends on what is happening in the case. But if you've got, a breach of contract case, the bills of lading, invoices, volume trackers, key, right? If you have a personal injury lawsuit, you'll have all of the communications related to that. You'll have tracking devices on individual trucks. You'll have all of that telemetry data related to where people were and when, and the time at which people pressed the brake on the truck before the accident. We've been involved in a lot of cases that have involved that type of black box data. We have to extract that, and that some of that becomes pretty critical to the case.
I gotta imagine too, because I've been reading about the nuclear deals and stuff that we're seeing kind of in the transportation and the motor carriers kind of getting blame because the courts and the judges and the juries kind of tend to fall for the victims, even if there's stuff like how was a truck supposed to like how were they supposed to avoid snowy conditions? They had to get there at this time, but I'm guessing that the email correspondence that brokers or shippers could have with motor carriers helps like almost puts them into the liability thing, even if it is something that isn't. You're not per se saying like drive through the snow, I don't care, but you're just sort of like checking in, and then the motor carrier can be like, this company's also liable. Like, am I wrong there? Is that
The structure of proximate cause is kind of the element you're talking about. That kind of remains the same. So there's this big decision called Paul's graph. It had to do with a train and an explosive device that was near a train, and figuring out who was responsible, whether the train company was responsible in some way because of the departure time, or whether it was just the person that had the explosive device. So those concepts stay the same, but the facts surrounding it is what changes, and you have a much more robust factual basis with all of this electronic data.
interesting? So that, I mean, personal liability is kind of one of those things that, yeah, of course, like they're going to come to you. But
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit about data breaching and stuff like that, especially because we see the supply chain is kind of vulnerable, and a lot of times it's those third parties. What would a company sort of be required to provide in eDiscovery if they do suffer a data breach? How does that work? How does the data breach side of things affect eDiscovery, or what would people kind of have to be ready for?
Yeah, so we get involved on the Proteus Discovery Group, which is our wholly owned eDiscovery company. We get involved in a lot of data breach analysis. So what's important? Obviously, the first thing is shutting off the faucet, right? making sure that if there was some sort of passion, that is as fast as it can be. After that point in time, there's analysis of what was actually compromised. And so you take a look at, well, this SQL database or this Oracle database was compromised. And then we usually come in and take a copy of that database and run a series of queries against it to figure out, what PII might have been compromised in that database. And we put together a notification list. And this will identify what type of PII was potentially compromised, whose PII it was, and their current contact information. And each state has a different definition of what PII is. And so we have to look at all 50 states because in a lot of these cases, this data is across the country. So we look at all 50 states and identify what PII may be in that state. And then you have to give a notice to the Attorney General in each of these states where someone might have had compromised information and say, this is what happened. This is the steps we went through to figure out whose PII was compromised. And then you're required to give a notification to each person whose data was potentially compromised.
So PII, I'm guessing sort of just that like personal identifier or?
Yeah, personal identifying information.
Okay.
So this could be anything from a credit card number, a bank account number. We've seen copies of canceled checks that didn't have redacted out the bank account and routing number, social security numbers, obviously. And then it's really interesting. There's some, pretty picayune sort of details in different states as to what would constitute. So a birthday is PII. In other states, a birthday is not PII. So it gets real complicated real quick.
It sounds like it's super complicated. How important is a company focusing on eDiscovery now help in the long run of everything?
Yeah, so the focus now, so if you think about this as a continuum, the furthest left side, the beginning side, is information governance. And this is, what data do we have? Where do we keep it? How is it secure? And what is the schedule for us reducing this data? And there are a whole lot of government regulations that play into this. If you have a state contract in Indiana, you have to keep employment records for 75 years, which is a big number. But if you, there are other, if you're subject to Sarbanes-Oxley, you have to keep all financial data or any information relied upon to contribute to the financial report for 7 years. And so, that's a pretty broad definition. And so it gets pretty specific to what industry you're in, what regulatory scheme you're under, and then what state you're in as to how long you need to keep certain data. And so people hire us to go through that analysis for them and then help them come up with a plan to either automatically reduce the size of their data or put them into buckets so people can go through and remove that data from the system at the right time.
So for a company that hasn't done that kind of work in information governance, in your estimation, how much like time, money, resources does it typically take a company to kind of do their eDiscovery? It sounds like it's going to be almost impossible to kind of say because it's like also what states were you involved in, all these types of things. But
Yeah.
kind of what are you seeing? Like how long does this typically take if a company did nothing?
If a company did nothing and was involved in a pretty high stakes lawsuit, I mean, you're looking at hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars to get everything, to get all the assets marshaled in the right way, and then get everything into a document review platform, hire a team of contract attorneys to review the documents, remove anything that may be privileged, so communications with attorneys or communications about a pending piece of litigation, and then negotiate with the opposing counsel everything that should be produced or should not be produced. That's easily several $100,000.
And then time-wise, I mean, you've been working on this forever. Like, what is that? Like, is there like, does it just? It's all depending on case of how long it's going to take.
Yeah, so I've been involved in cases, that the discovery portion lasts 6 months. I'm also involved in cases where the discovery portion's been going on for 10 years. So it's a wide gamut of how long it lasts.
Wow. Typically, like how much? I mean, this is probably the dumb question because again, it's going to be based off of case, right? But how many resources? How much does it take, kind of people wise? Is it sort of like the more resources you pay at it, the quicker it happens, but the more it's going to cost? Like it's probably a diagram, right? It's probably like all interconnected, but like it's not something that like you can throw an intern on and be like, all right, hey, you need to go collect all the crap we have, right?
Right. Yeah. So the largest one I was involved in, which actually was the spark of Discovery Master, we had 350 contract attorneys for 18 months. Yeah. So it was a lot.
Oh my gosh. All right, this sounds horrible. I hope that anyone listening to this kind of is like, it's kind of almost kind of, oh no. But let's transition. I know we've been talking about it, but let's talk a little bit more about information governance. I guess you kind of done a good job explaining sort of what it is. I mean, is there anything else that like you find people don't really understand when it comes to what information governance is?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't think about information governance until after they've been hit with a lawsuit and had to go through the e-discovery process. But having good information governance practices helps mitigate some of the concerns that you aired right at the beginning about personal privacy. So if you have an employee workforce that's using their personal devices for both work and personal use, um, not having any information governance policy on those personal devices uh, can lead to some significant issues later. One, if that employee leaves on not so good terms and they have data you need for a case, that creates a sticky situation. Two, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, here in Indiana, if we were to let an employee go, I could probably press a button on my computer and wipe their device, and it would be fine. But in other jurisdictions, you could get sued for that. And so having a policy in place about what you're going to do with employees' devices, with the corporate data on that device when an employee departs, that's a very basic information governance policy that can be created. And that was a huge deal maybe 3 or 4 years ago when people were really starting to think about having their personal devices at work. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just it's also like it's all interesting, but like what's been, and I hate to take us off information
Mhm.
governance, but what's been happening? I mean, with the work from home, with the idea that like you've had to do this, and it's not big companies either. It's kind of everyone's had to adjust to using personal devices. How's the courts? Is there any kind of change on the horizon to kind of help this, or is it really truly on companies to like, hey, unfortunately, we live in this new data age that you're going to have to use personal devices. We're going to have to be collaborative in how we're going to kind of handle this type of thing.
Yeah, so typically courts work several years behind. So we'll probably see the first parts of this next year or the year after. And I recently spoke on this issue because we talk about that hockey stick growth of electronic data. Well, I mean that's just exploded with work from home. The amount of people using Teams and Slack and Zoom has just created an unbelievable amount of data, especially if you're recording uh, these sorts of things. They're all in play. And how do you search it, right? Because it's all audio. How do you run search terms against something like that? So the need for translation services, the need for talk to text is going to increase exponentially. Um, and getting to this data is going to be really expensive at first, and then as more participants get into this e-discovery marketplace, that cost is going to be driven down. But it's going to be there, and it's going to be on companies to deal with that, and that part's not going to change. So there's this concept in the law called proportionality. And so if you have a case that has an amount of controversy of $10,000, courts aren't going to make you spend $100,000 in discovery costs for that $10,000 case. And there are a bunch of factors that go into play here, and this is all argument. So, you would hire an attorney to argue, well, we don't have to do X, Y, and Z based on proportionality because, there's not a lot at risk in this case. The issues aren't that important. Or there's this other concept called cost shifting. And so if you can demonstrate good cause on proportionality to not do something, but the other side's like, no, we absolutely need this. The court can say, well, if you need it so bad, you could pay for it. And so, that those two things, I think, are going to see some increased use, especially with all of this new data we're creating.
But still, at the end of the day, that means you're going to have the lawyer fees and all that stuff. The better way to go about this is information governance.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
So aside from kind of setting up those policies and principles when it comes to sort of personal advices, how does an organization kind of set up their information governance? How do you what's kind of their first steps? What should they be doing?
Yeah, so I think figuring out what industries you're working in and getting a set of regulations for data retention is an excellent first step to this process. Also, putting in policies with regard to how long you keep email at a corporate level. So all email is kept for 45 days, and if it's not moved to a folder, then that email is deleted. And you can set those policies in Office 365 or any other sort of software that you're using for email management, and that's a critically important. Also, when there is a lawsuit, you have to take steps to suspend that automatic deletion for those particular users. And that's where some people get caught up, is they put the policy in place but forget to suspend it. And then a bunch of information gets deleted and it causes more issues in the litigation. So you just have to be proactive about it and follow up on it. You could do the same for text messages. You can set a 30-day policy on your device, and all of those texts go away after 30 days. If you have a corporate policy related to that, that is also a good thing.
Now, what about when you flip in the norm, right? So okay, I'm in operations, right? I know that invoice is a 90-day thing. Is it flexible enough, especially for information governance, to say hey, in the transportation emails, we don't delete these for X number of days, or like you said, you probably just move it to a folder. But is that sort of it's sort of a bigger web than just line in the sand, this is how we do it? Is that acceptable, or how does that work with information governance?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both, which is the lawyer answer to any question. But you would want to look at the regulatory scheme that you're under. So if it has to do with transportation of nuclear material, I imagine that needs to be preserved for a lot longer than your typical transportation of a bundle of socks.
Right? Sure.
And so you can't put a line in the sand and say invoices last for this long across the board. If their invoice is related to a certain type of thing, that may need to be kept for longer.
Right. So it sounds like a kind of, again, not trying to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like they're really, especially for information governance, to be helpful. Not to just be this blank, look at, we did it, let's go to Chili's, we're getting riblets, guys, everyone did their job. You do need to have a good communication line with your data team and your operations team, and most likely every team, to kind of explain what you're doing. Because I know the data team doesn't really know shipping, doesn't need to know how freight and all that stuff moves, but they also need to be aware, and your legal team needs to kind of be able to communicate to everyone, here's how we need to save this stuff.
Yeah. And going back to your Chili's analogy, it probably would be good to sit down over a set of riblets and discuss these things between operations teams and have a regular cadence where that conversation occurs, because there are always new regulations that come out, and just keeping apprised of those and seeing how that impacts the rest of the business units is pretty key to having a strong information governance policy.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm always down to get some riblets at Chili's, but their queso is amazing once it opens up again. But yeah, I guess I think that's one of the vital things. It's funny because it comes up time and time and time again in my podcast of like, it's all communication. Like you're gonna need to communicate. It's not just a set it and forget it. This isn't an Instapot. You do need to continue talking because, like you say, things change. Things change on the legal side. Things change on the transportation side. So you kind of spoke to this a little bit, but like aside from helping to reduce cost and disruption, why is having a robust information governance program vital to a company? What's like the thing they don't think about?
Yeah, so I think that on some level it feeds on itself, right? So if you have a beginning point where these conversations occur, I think it helps streamline all of your business processes because people understand if I make decision X, this is the impact it has across the board. And so it creates a stronger framework for the whole company. And you can see some savings in other areas just by having that continued communication.
Yeah. No, honestly, it is kind of like I'm having sort of aha moments with this type of stuff of like, hey, this is an easy way to kind of make divisions talk to each other, which is
Yeah.
always kind of the bane of business, right? It's like this group doesn't talk to this group because they blah blah blah. But like, hey, nope, we could be sued for a lot, and it's going to be a lot of money for us to figure this out. Seems like a really good reason for information governance to kind of be built into the culture of a company.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to wrap, I want to talk a little bit about Discovery Master because
Mhm.
I was reading some blogs and I love this line that you had in one of the blogs you wrote about where you kind of came up for the idea for Discovery Master.
Yeah.
And he said, teaching, coaching, and bringing out the best in passionate young musicians was a huge joy to me. Discovery Master is one way I channel my undergrad education to professionals passionate about innovating in the legal profession. I cannot read words well. Sorry about that. That's why I'm a podcaster, right? I love the idea of like you're taking kind of this music education, which again is always like, wow, you minored or you majored in music education to bring kind of innovation. Talk a little bit about like why you have that passion, why it's so important for you.
Yeah. So lawyers went to law school to practice law. They didn't go to law school to create fancy Excel spreadsheets. And so what most people end up doing is in this discovery process is they have to put together just a ton of spreadsheets with a lot of reporting, and no one understands what numbers are going in, and it's like it's a very difficult process. And it's a huge time suck. So when I was working on that case with the 350 contract attorneys, I would lose a day a week just putting together reports on how things were going. Um, and so I developed this tool, Discovery Master, to take away a lot of the need for those Excel spreadsheets. So people get up-to-date information. They understand what they're looking at because we do it in a very visual way, so people can see where we're at in the progress of the case, where we're at on the budget, how much time it will take until it's completed, just kind of the stuff that they care about. And so, for me, I think that sort of innovation is that spark of creativity that I really enjoyed in teaching music. So you see someone have that kind of aha moment in teaching, and I'm bringing that to the legal technology space, and it's pretty cool.
It's so cool because I can see it. Like you can kind of you see when you like hand someone a report and they're like, okay, Kyle, cool, what's this? But you're like, no, I'm trying to teach you what this one piece of information is so exciting. It's just cool to hear kind of taking kind of your music education kind of background and applying it into a legal sense. Especially, I mean, with how connected today's world is, it's got to be something that's vital. And how do you teach someone who doesn't really care too much? I mean, transportation, we deal with the same thing. They only care mainly your C-suite only cares about why is the product there and why the hell does it cost so much.
Yeah.
And like that's a big thing that I battle too. A lot of what the podcast is trying to explain to shippers. How do you explain these things to your bosses and your boss's boss? Because that's the hardest part about business. It's the communication with all this stuff. But I love what you guys are doing. It sounds fascinating. For anyone who's interested, where can they go to kind of get some more information? How do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website, we have proteusdiscovery.com. for development of information governance policies. Discoverymaster.co is our piece of software. If you want to take a look at that, and you can reach out to me at Ray at ProteusDiscovery.com or even Ray at DiscoveryMaster.co.
Jeez, you got a lot of emails, so you better have a good information governance policy in place.
Exactly.
I know a little bit about it, so I can tell you about that. We can go to Chili's if you want to talk some more about this. What about LinkedIn? What if someone kind of just wants to personally, is that LinkedIn a good location for them to reach out to you? I try to include all the links in the show notes so people can kind of see everything, but on LinkedIn, is that a good place?
Yeah, LinkedIn's great too. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, Ray, thank you so much for this information. I have a feeling we're probably going to have to talk more because I'm sure as more and more we try to figure out this whole work from home, there's going to be more information governance kind of policies that people aren't even thinking about coming up.
Yeah, well, it's been great to be on here, and thank you very much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. I had a blast. This is a great conversation, Ray. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Bye. And that's our show. Have a question about data security that we didn't talk about? Leave a comment. We'll be sure to answer it in the next episode. In the meantime, subscribe to our channel to see more content like this. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle MacNaught. Rock and roll.